We are quite conscious in our world today about conflicts of interest. And whenever we serve on a board, whenever we're in a place where we make decisions, we always have to be careful to give full disclosure about any interest that we may have. I still serve on the National Grants Committee for the National Church, and as we meet together twice a year and sometimes for emergent meetings, there are moments where there are grant requests that come before the National Grant Committee that come from churches that I know, from colleagues here in the Presbyterian of Montreal, and we always walk an interesting narrow line. On the one hand, we have to answer questions. I know these congregations, I know these ministries very well because I'm here, and so I often get a chance to present the grant request and to speak in favor of it and to answer questions that people have because I'm right here in Montreal, and I know about Action Réfugiés and about the other groups and other ministries and congregations that make grant requests. But when it comes time to vote, I have to recuse myself from the vote. I have to step back, and I'm not allowed to cast a vote because I'm seen to have a link. Well, I need to give you full disclosure this morning as we've worked our way through these 5 introductory psalms. This morning we hit, I think, what is probably my favorite psalm in the Psalter, Psalm 107. There are a number of reasons why I really like it. I'm still an English major at heart. My first BA was in English literature and poetry and children's literature. And I love this psalm because it is one of the most beautifully written. There's a rhythm and a rhyme to it. There's refrains and there's repetition that drive home the points that it makes in a very, very powerful way. I also love it because it's not pie-in-the-sky, theoretical, theological thinking. Some of the Psalms deal with heavy, deep issues, and this one really is in the practice of everyday life. It's based on tangible life experiences, and it really reaches me where I'm at. It talks about people who are in difficulty, and as I read the text and I hear about the difficulties they face, I have to admit that often I find myself in the same difficult circumstances that they're in. But most importantly, I love this psalm because in a way that is probably better than many of the others, it celebrates the goodness of God even in the most difficult of circumstances. It celebrates the way God again and again and again responds to the cries of mercy of his people to redeem them, to rescue them, and to restore them after they find themselves in trouble. In a really neat way, Psalm 106 and Psalm 107 straddle the end of Book 4 and the beginning of Book 5. Psalm 106 is the last one at the end of the 4th collection of Psalms, and then you close up that book and you open Book 5, and Psalm 107 begins the 5th collection. It's a little bit like those old TV shows used to do. You know, you used to watch those TV shows that went from week to week, and every week the TV show would end, and as the TV show ended this week, as the episode ended, your hero would be hanging over the edge of a cliff and you didn't know whether he was going to survive till the next week, and you had to tune in next week to the same channel, the same time, the same place to see whether the hero was going to survive and live for another day. Psalm 106 is a lament. There's very little positive in Psalm 106. The 2 verses we read this morning as our call to worship are just about the most positive thing in Psalm 106. And from there, God's people look to him in a lament, and they say, God, you've exiled us far away. We're spread in distant lands. We're all over the place. We miss you. We miss the temple. We miss being together. We want to be together. I don't know if this sounds familiar, but this is where they were at the end of Psalm 106. And so Psalm 106 actually ends with this plea to God and says, God, bring us together again. Bring us together from the places where we're in exile, where we're isolated, where we're stuck in distant lands. Bring us together once more. And that ends Psalm 106, and it ends the 4th book of the Psalms. And then you turn the page, and there's Psalm 107 at the beginning of book 5. And in a way that is beautifully crafted, you get an answer to the question, will God be able to do this? Will God want to do this? Does he still love his people, or has he given up on them? And the psalm is beautifully crafted. There are 4 stanzas, and each of the 4 stanzas follows a repetitive pattern. And then there's an intro, and there's a closing section. The 4 stanzas are so regular that by the time we get to the end of the 4th stanza, some of you will be rolling your eyes and say, okay, I know how this is going to go. I know the next line. He's going to say, and that's good. That's what you're meant to do. It's written like a good children's book. Those of you who read books to your children, there's this thing that's supposed to happen when they first begin to read with you, and you sit with them on the edge of their bed, reading through the storybook. At the end of the day, when a children's storybook is well written, as you get to the last pages, even though your child can't read yet, he almost anticipates. He almost knows what's coming. He can almost figure out the next line, and you're meant to do that by the time you get to the end of Psalm 107. Let me read the introduction, Psalm 107. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so is our title. Psalm 107, verse 1. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so, whom he has redeemed from trouble and gathered in from the lands, from the east and from the west, from the north and from the south. This is about Hesed. This is faithful, promise-keeping love. And it really needs to be celebrated, says Psalm 107. The writer becomes a choir master, except he doesn't have a planned out choir. He hasn't recruited people. There's the congregation before him, and he looks at them and he says, you're going to sing with me. And what is it that they say? What is it that the redeemed of the Lord say? The Lord is good, and his steadfast love endures forever. But he invites people to join him in the song. And the people he invites, he calls them the redeemed of the Lord, those he has gathered from trouble. The four stanzas all appear to describe different people. He's going to tell us that some had wandered over here. Some were in trouble over there. Some were struggling because of this. Some had this difficulty over there. And the way it's worded, it's meant to have you think, who is this? You know, sometimes you share stories together. Sometimes somebody comes to see me in my office and is looking for advice, and they'll say, you know, I know this person. There's this, guy I know, and he's having this trouble with his wife or his kids. And the text is meant to do that. Well, some people had, and you think, who are some people? And you realize after we get to the end of the psalm that the some people is us. And each of the four stanzas is really an image. And you'll see in the images, in the pictures that are drawn, that it's a picture of the Lord's people being rescued from exile. That's when this psalm is written. At the end of Psalm 106, they're in exile. They're wondering whether the Lord will be able to bring them back from exile. And when you flip to the beginning of Psalm 107, let the redeemed of the Lord say so, those who's redeemed from lands far away and brought back, and you go, aha, the Lord has done it. He's been able to bring them back. So what happens now? They're going to celebrate. But they're not just celebrating the fact that the captivity in Babylon is over and the Lord has called us back. As you read through the text, you'll get to the point where you think, wait, are they just coming back from Babylon? It almost sounds like they're coming out of the Exodus. And the two events almost overlap in the psalm. And God is saying, you know the way he's just brought you back from exile in Babylon? Well, that's not the first time he did that. Because once you were in exile in Egypt, and he brought you out of that. And you end up realizing that this isn't just describing one event. This isn't just describing the Lord bringing back his loved ones from exile in Babylon. This isn't just the Lord describing the way he brought his people out of Egypt through the Exodus. This is the Lord describing, in fact, how he has redeemed you and I through the Lord Jesus Christ, as this redemption finds fulfillment in the pages of the New Testament. So we're urged to sing. We're gathered together from the east and from the west, from the north and from the south. And now begins the first stanza in verse 4. Let's consider the first test case. Verse 4, some wandered in desert wastes, finding no way to a city to dwell in. Hungry and thirsty, their soul fainted within them. Well, this is about the children of Israel wandering through the desert, longing to be home in the promised land. But this is also about the exiles in Babylon, in foreign places, longing to be home to their city, to Jerusalem. Maybe today this is about you and I in exile from our place of worship, longing to be back together here to worship together, longing so much for that we're hungry and thirsty and our soul fainted within us. So what do we do when we're there? I don't know if you remember when your children were little and you taught them to dial 911. I hope you did that. One of the hearts of this psalm is, just the way we teach our children to call for help if something happens. The psalm teaches us that when you're in trouble, you dial 911. And there's that first refrain in verse 6. They're wandering in desert wastes. They'd no way to a city to dwell in. They're hungry and thirsty. Their soul fainted within them. What do you do when you're there? Verse 6, then they cried to the Lord in their trouble. There's some hymns that we sing on Sunday morning, some of the good old hymns. They have these repetitive lines. And sometimes those repetitive lines are very, very catchy. And I tell you often that one of the reasons I like singing some of those hymns with the repetitive lines is that during the week when you're in trouble, when you're on the decarry and somebody cuts you off, when you're waiting for a bus and it's cold in the morning, when you're struggling with your spouse or your children, when you're in that point of testing, I want these lines to keep coming back to you. When you're in trouble during the week, by the time we've gotten to the end of Psalm 107, you will have heard this line enough times that it will come back to you. When you're in difficulty, when you're in trouble, what do? You don't call 911. You don't reach for the fire extinguisher or the first aid kit. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble. I want you to know that refrain by the time we're done. But wait, that's only half the refrain. There's two lines to the refrain. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and they were smart enough that they got themselves out of trouble. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. There's a beautiful use of parallelism here. The Psalms often do this. We've looked at this together. We saw it in Lamentations. We saw it in some of the other writings. We saw it in Proverbs together as we went through it on Wednesday evenings. And it's powerful in Psalms, and it really works well here. When the Psalms use parallelism, the second line doesn't just repeat the same thought in slightly different words. The different choice of words actually drives the point home by putting a bit of a bite on it. These people are facing two things that drive them to cry to the Lord. They're facing trouble and they're facing distress. The two words are related, they're close, but there's a slightly different tinge of meaning. Distress, anybody could be in distress. Distress happens because somebody else made a mistake, because circumstances are hard, because the weather's bad, because the economy is breaking down around you. But trouble carries a connotation of guilt. There's something I've done that's in my fault. When I'm in distress, that's one thing, but when I'm in trouble, it's because I've done something wrong. You remember when you were little with your siblings and you did something wrong, and your brother or sister said, "You're going to be in trouble." Mom's going to be upset at you. Or wait till your dad gets home. You're in trouble. So we cry out to the Lord in our trouble, and the Lord responds to our distress. He saves us out of our distress. This is quite a partnership. This is an interesting sharing of tasks with the Lord. Our job is, the part that we contribute here, is that we get ourselves in trouble, and the Lord saves us from our distress. In this crying out for help, there is an inference of confession. It's a contrite prayer that says to God, I need help because of something I have done. This was certainly the case for the children of Israel in exile. They were in captivity because of their rebellion. Their sin and their waywardness had got them into trouble, and yet when they cried to the Lord, He still responded. He saved them from their distress. He doesn't give us the cold shoulder. He doesn't say, you know what, you're in trouble and it's your fault. Tough. The Lord saves us out of our distress. I don't know if you've ever been in a case where you've been in trouble or you've been in distress and you could honestly say that you had absolutely nothing to do with it, that it was 100% somebody else's fault, that you were 100% blameless, that you carried 0% of the guilt, that there's nothing you could have done differently, that there's nothing that you did that in any way made the trouble that you're in worse. I don't think we're ever in that situation where it's that clear-cut. And when we're struggling in some difficult circumstances, we're so often so aware of the role that we've played in getting ourselves into that mess. We're so conscious that a part of this is our fault that we're reticent to ask for help from anybody, particularly from the Lord, because we feel like we're getting what we deserve. And who am I to expect that the Lord would help me? And who am I to expect that the Lord would help me now that I've gotten myself in this mess? Well, in Psalm 107, the writer is going to drive home several powerful points for us. And we have the first one here. It's not just that when you're in trouble, the best response is to cry out to the Lord for help. It's better than that. When you're in trouble, when you're in the mess up to your neck, even if your fingerprints are all over it, still, the best thing to do is to cry out to the Lord in your trouble, because He will save you from your distress. And I like the fact that this help isn't some disconnected thing. You know, some people, when you ask them for help, the help they give you end up having nothing to do with what you need. You got a problem over here, but they want to sell you something else. But not the Lord. He always knows exactly what we need. Listen to these verses again. Some wandered in desert wastes, finding no way to a city to dwell in. Hungry and thirsty, their soul fainted within them. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and He delivered them from their distress. He led them by a straight way, and He gave them a set of encyclopedias. He led them by a straight way till they reached a city to dwell in. The Lord is not only close enough that He hears our pain and He cares about our trouble and He rescues us from our trouble, but He gives us exactly what we need. Those of us who are parents, we know sometimes how hard it can be to get our kids to ask for help when they need it. Remember, one of our little ones was in trouble with math class. Failed a couple tests, never told us anything. In about 3 days from the final exam at the end of the year, I failed every midterm so far, and I don't think I'm going to pass the provincial midterm. Could you help me study tomorrow for the test that's on Wednesday? I don't know where it happens, but they go from being very, very dependent when they're very little, and before you know it, they can't wait to be off flying on their own. But if it's hard to get them to ask for help when they need it, there's one thing that's even harder. What's even harder than getting them to ask for help when they need it? Getting them to say thank you. And that's the next lesson the psalm drives home. After these people who are wandering lost in desert wastes, crying out to the Lord for a safe place to stay, the Lord saved them out of their distress. He rescued them from their trouble. He showed them the way. He brought them to a safe city to dwell in. And now what should they do? They should thank the Lord. The wording in the Hebrew here is really neat because the pronoun is stressed and it's emphatic only the way they could do it. Verse 8, let them thank the Lord for His steadfast love, for His wondrous works for the children of man. For He satisfies the longing soul, and the hungry soul He fills with good things. Let them thank the Lord. Of all people who should praise God and thank the Lord, they should. Now, the writer of the psalm knows that we're just like our kids. We don't always pay attention the way we should. And he wants us to make sure that we remember these 3 lessons he's taught us. So he's going to repeat them. He's going to keep talking about the way the children of Israel were rescued from exile, but he's going to use 3 more images to describe what that was like. The first image he used was of people who are wandering in the desert wastelands. They're hungry and they're thirsty. They're fainting from fatigue. They're looking for an oasis. They're looking for a safe city. They're looking for a place where they're going to be home and be fed and have water and be in security. Now, the next image is a little different. He's going to talk about captivity in a different way. He's going to talk about the way sometimes in our disobedience we find ourselves imprisoned. We're shackled in our sin. We're chained to the wall in a dark prison cell. Verse 10. Some sat, it's the same some again. Who's the some? Well, hey, it might be you and I. Some sat in darkness and in the shadow of death, prisoners in affliction and in irons. Why were they in irons? Why were they imprisoned? For they had rebelled against the words of God and spurned the counsel of the Most High. So he bowed their hearts down with hard labor. They fell down with none to help. Sometimes when things are going really well, God has a hard time getting our attention. And he wants what's best for us. And sometimes we're in the middle of so much blessing, we don't know what to do with it. We're clear sailing, we got a great job, we're making good money, we have a nice home, nice spouse, everything's going honky-dory, but we're not obeying God. And he has to stop us to get our attention. And sometimes the best way to stop us in our tracks is for hard circumstances to come along and to bow us down in hard labor. And then we're forced to stop and think. And we're forced to realize that we're in trouble, and then you wonder, why am I in trouble? Now you should know the answer to this, but when you're in trouble, what do you do? What should you do even if you're in trouble and you're there by your own fault? You know what to do. Here's the refrain again in verse 13. What do you think they did? Then they, an emphatic pronoun again, then they who were in prison by their own fault, then they cried to the Lord in their trouble. And what does the Lord do when in broken humility, bowed down in the hard labor and imprisonment of our sin? What does he do when we cried out to him? Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he told them to wait till next week. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He brought them out of darkness and the shadow of death and burst their bonds apart. So we cry to the Lord in our trouble, and he rescues us in our distress. And then what do? You know this is the second refrain, verse 15. Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wondrous works to the children of man. For he shatters the doors of bronze, and he cuts in two the bars of iron. I love that image. There were large, massive walls that surrounded the fortified city of Babylon. You may have seen pictures of it. Beautiful thing, many stories high. It was massive. It was impenetrable. Not only was it impossible to get in, it was also impossible to get out when you were imprisoned inside. In those big stone walls that were many, many stories high, that were 30, 40, 50 feet across at some point, with moats in the middle and dividers in the middle. In case the enemies breached through the first layer, they had to get through the second and the third. It was impossible to get through. And you would think that the weak points would be the gates. How do you get in and out of that city? There's moments where you see gates, and these gates would be made out of big, massive timbers. But these massive timbers, if the enemies attacked these massive wooden gates, they might be able to get through. And so what the Babylonians did is that running inside these big wooden gates, there were bars of iron that strengthened these big wooden gates. And so even if you had a saw, you were able to cut into the wood, you would eventually hit these bars of iron and you couldn't get through them. But not only that, to make sure that the enemies couldn't approach and set the wooden gates on fire, they had developed this technique where they would plate the wooden gates with bronze. And so there were thick, heavy wooden gates. They were solidified by iron bars inside, and they were covered with this protective layer of bronze that meant that you couldn't light it on fire and you couldn't cut through them to get through the wood beneath. And so if you were going to bust through the gates of the walls of the city of Babylon, where you were kept in prison because of your sin in your captivity, you not only had to cut through the wood, but you had to break the bars of iron, and you had to shatter the bronze doors. God is breaking them out. He's breaking them out of captivity The gates of Babylon can hold them no longer. He shatters the doors of bronze, and he cuts in two the bars of iron. He doesn't just come and try and jimmy the lock. He doesn't show up in the middle of the night with a pick and try and get you out, or try and dig a tunnel to surreptitiously, maybe discreetly get you out of the city of Babylon, one or two at a time. He comes in, he barges in, and he breaks the doors down, because no fortress is impenetrable to the Lord, and no prison is escape-proof when the Lord has decided to get you out. So now you've got the pattern. Watch as he drives it home again. Except in the third stanza, the problem isn't that they're wandering in a desert wasteland. The problem isn't that they're caught and imprisoned in captivity where they can't escape in the impenetrable city walls of Babylon. This next group of people are suffering some kind of affliction that the Hebrew describes like being in a dark pit. A pit so dark and discouraging that they've lost all their appetite and they won't eat anymore. A pit of dark depression because of their sinful ways and their iniquities. Verse 17, some, who are the some, might be you and I. Some were fools through their sinful ways, and because of their iniquities they suffered affliction. They loathed any kind of food, and they drew near to the gates of death. Now I want to be very careful. The scriptures never say that all mental illness and all depression is because of sin. But the scriptures are very clear that there's a moment when you're hardened in your sin and you won't listen to the voice of God. You find yourself soon in a pit of despair and desperation. Because of their iniquities, they were afflicted. They loathed any kind of food. They drew near the gates of death. Seems like they might even be contemplating taking their own lives. And what do you think they should do? What do you think you do when you're in trouble this deep? What do you do when you're in trouble this deep, when you're in this dark pit? Even if it's your fault, what do you do? Verse 19, then they cry to the Lord in their trouble. When we cry out to the Lord in the trouble, in the depths of our mess, in the depth of our trouble, what happens? You know what happens. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he sent them a postcard. Told them to hang in there. Everything will be better. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He sent out his word and healed them and delivered them from their destruction. We get hardened in our sin and our rebellion against God. And soon enough, we wind up in this dark pit to which there's no exit, in which there's no light. We think everything is helpless and hopeless. We cry out to the Lord, and he delivers us. And he delivers us by sending his word. And he said, you need to listen. You need to listen to my teaching. You need to listen to my advice. This is the only way out. And as we listen to his word and we find solace in him again, he heals us and he delivers us from that pit of destruction. So I ask you again, you get the pattern now. You're in the depth of darkness and depression. You're alone. You're abandoned. You think you've had it. And in the midst of the pit, you're up to your neck in trouble. And you finally come to your senses. You cry out to the Lord. And the Lord responds and he saves you from your distress. And after you've been graciously rescued by the Lord, what do? Verse 21. Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wondrous works to the children of men, and let them offer sacrifices of thanksgiving and tell of his deeds in songs of joy. The people who were wandering without a city, they were in the desert, they didn't know where to go, they didn't have a secure place, they had no food to eat. The Lord rescues them, and what does he do for them? He brings them to the city that they were longing for. The people who were imprisoned in the dark, they were imprisoned, they're exiles in captivity. What they needed was freedom, and the Lord gave it to them. These people who were in this dark pit of depression and despair, and they looked to the Lord and they cried to the Lord, and he rescues them. He heals them by his word, and what does he give them? He gives them exactly what they most needed. Songs of joy. Let them offer sacrifices of thanksgiving and tell of his deeds in songs of joy. Now, educational specialists tell us that to be sure something really sinks in, you need to repeat it at least 3 times. I kind of have fun as, in the evening when we're watching the news at home, sometimes I'll be stuffing envelopes or I'll be working at Excel spreadsheets or, there's always these tasks you need to do at the end of the day where you don't need 100% of your focus and you're already kind of half asleep and the news is on and I'm piddling at these things. And usually at this point or a little before, Debbie is cutting stuff out for the class the next day or the next week. And she's working at letters and numbers and colors. And sometimes I see her working at a letter and I go, I thought they learned that letter like 2 weeks ago. And you go, yeah, but this is repeating now. We're reviewing. So educational specialists tell us that if you want somebody to get something, you just don't tell them once. You don't just tell them twice. You need to tell them 3 times. Well, the psalm has given us this message 3 times. And there's a 4th one coming. It's going to drive it home. It's going to be even more powerful. And this time he's going to use the image of sailors going to sea. They're going in ships, on the great ships out on the open seas. And the ship is beaten about by the waves. It goes up and down and sideways. And Ransford would tell us that I think there's a different word for when the ship goes up and down and sideways, depending on which direction the ship is moving in. There's actually a word for each of these weird directions your ship moves in. And the physical movement of being in a storm at sea is the image of what happens to our heart and our soul when we're tossed back and forth. We go from up to despair to up to despair and back and forth, and we're up and down because we've strayed from the Lord. And at first it's going to sound like these poor people are just sailors trying to go about their business. These poor sailors, what fault is it of theirs? This is their job. They're sailors. They're going out to sea on the ship. And why is the Lord picking on them with this great storm? But in verse 26, it describes what they're doing as an evil plight. They've disobeyed, we're going to realize, and now they're running away from God. So they're not on the open sea because they're earning a living like Ranford was when he went out on these big liners, but they're running away. And it sounds like this psalm may have been written after the time when the prophet Jonah was called to preach in the Assyrian capital of Nineveh. You remember what he did, don't you? The Lord told him, go to Nineveh, to the capital of Assyria, and I want you to preach to them. And Jonah goes the other way. Instead of going east, inland, he goes west, he goes to the port, he gets on a ship, and he pays his fare, and he says, take me as far away as you can get me, and that was Spain. So he boards a ship that's headed for Spain, completely the other way, diametrically opposed. And God had to chase him down, and God chases him down with the storm, and the wind, and the waves, and he gets tossed overseas, and God eventually chases him down with a whale, or big fish, the text says in Hebrew. This is what's going on here. These people, they've rebelled against God. They got on a ship. They're trying to escape. And God's hunting them down. Verse 23. Some people. Who are the some people? It might be us. Some went down to the sea in ships, doing business on the great waters. They saw the deeds of the Lord, his wondrous works in the deep. For he commanded and raised the stormy winds which lifted up the waves of the sea. They mounted up to heaven, the seas going up the waves, then went down to the depths. Their courage melted away in their evil plight. They reeled and staggered like drunken men. They can't keep their footing on the ship. And they were at their wits' end. Now, please tell me that you've been paying attention and that you know what comes next. What do you do when you're in the middle of a mess of a storm because you're running from God and suddenly you realize that you've been a fool trying to run away from him, trying to resist him, and these breakers and these waves are all around you and you're in trouble up to your neck and you're in a mess and it's your fault and you've done this? And what do you do when you finally come to your senses? You know what to do. Verse 28. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble. And when you cry to the Lord in your trouble, what does he do? Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He knows just what they need. He made the storm to be still, and the waves of the sea were hushed. Wait a minute, the waves are my fault. The wind is my fault. I've brought this on myself. I messed up. I sinned. I rebelled against God, and now I'm running away. And these waves and these breakers, this is my punishment. This is what I deserve. This is what's coming upon me but delivers me from my distress. He made the storm to be still, and the waves of the sea were hushed. And he does better than that. Not only does he quiet the storm, they were glad when the waters were quiet. And he brought them to their desired haven. I've been told that I needed to relax a little more, and I have a hard time just sitting still and relaxing and just doing nothing. And so a couple friends have suggested I need to read a little bit more fiction. And so I've gone back in time a little bit, and I picked up Tom Clancy's novels, the Jack Ryan novels. And it's written like 20, 30 years ago. Picked them up at the paperback shop, really cheap. And just finished reading again The Hunt for Red October. And Jack Ryan, who's an analyst with the CIA, he's not a sailor, he's not a man of the seas. He winds up stuck in this submarine. He doesn't have sea legs, gets seasick, doesn't even like to fly. And he's, in the final chapters, he's stuck in this submarine that's being hunted down by Russian subs, and they get torpedoed, and they almost go down. And in one of the final scenes is finally he gets off the sub, and when you're in a submarine and you're claustrophobic and you're seasick, it's not. So when finally he things are settled, he gets safe. They wind up in port in Norfolk, Virginia, at the naval base, and he gets off the sub. And there's this interesting line when he gets off. And he puts his feet on the cement on the shore, on the dock. And he just stands there and appreciates the fact that his 2 feet are on the dock, on the solid ground. The Lord takes us out of the storm, out of the waves. He stills the wave. And he brings us to our desired haven. He brings us to port. And he plants our feet solidly on the ground after we'd been at sea, reeling like drunken men up and down in the waves. Now you know this too. When the Lord delivers us like this, when the Lord rescues us from the sea and the waves and the turmoil where we thought that was it, that we were done for, and we were there because of our sin and our iniquity, but the Lord rescues us from that, and he brings us home to port safely, what are we supposed to do? You know what we're supposed to do. Verse 31. Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wondrous works to the children of man. Let them extol him in the congregation of the people and praise him in the assembly of the elders. Now this sounds great. You know, these 4 groups of people, they were in trouble, they were in distress, they made some mistakes, they were in it up to their eyeballs, and the Lord rescued them. But how do I know that the Lord is going to be able to rescue me? How do I know that God is powerful enough that, these 4 incidents, they might just be chance things. They might just be incidental. These were 4 moments where the Lord happened to know what to do. What if I find myself in a situation where the Lord can't rescue me, can't save me? Well, the psalmist knows you're going to ask that question, and so he breaks in now. There's these 4 stanzas. You think the psalm is over. There's going to be a nice little conclusion. But he's got a parenthesis. Before he closes with a nice little conclusion, he first wants to assure you about something, that God can handle whatever you can throw at him. And so this long paragraph, which is really the longest paragraph in the psalm, one of the longest paragraphs we've got anywhere in the Psalms, he tells you a little bit more about this God who can rescue you when you call out to him in your distress. It starts at verse 33. This is what God can do. He turns rivers into a desert, springs of water into thirsty ground, a fruitful land into a salty waste because of the evil of its inhabitants. When you mess up, when people disobey, when people rebel in their sin, God can do this. He can take a river and turn it into a desert like that. He can take springs of water and turn it into thirsty ground. You're going headlong in your sin. The money's rolling in. You're living high and mighty. Everything going your way, and you think nothing can stop you. And suddenly you come face to face with the justice and the righteousness of God. He can do that. But he also does the reverse, verse 35. He turns a desert into pools of water, a parched land into springs of water. And there he lets the hungry dwell, and they establish a city to live in. They sow fields and plant vineyards and get a fruitful yield. By his blessing they multiply greatly, and he does not let their livestock diminish. When they are diminished and brought low through oppression, evil, and sorrow, he pours contempt on princes and makes them wander in trackless wastes. The high and the mighty, they think they've got it wired. They think that nothing can touch them. They think that they're impervious to anything that God can do. Not so. He can bring them low. He can diminish them. But, verse 41, but he raises up the needy out of affliction and makes their families like flocks. The upright see it and are glad, and all wickedness shuts its mouth. And here's the concluding verse of the psalm. Whoever is wise, let him attend to these things. Let them consider the steadfast love of the Lord. I don't know which part of this psalm you needed to hear this morning. I don't know what part of the psalm in the sermon was for you this morning. Some of you are still in open rebellion against God. You're running your own way. You're living in sin and disobedience. You're like Jonah. You've heard God speak, and God said, go this way and do it this way. And you said, no, not for me. I'm going over here. And you jumped on ship, and you're headed in a direction as far away as you can imagine the other way. And I got to tell you this morning, if you're running from God, there is a storm brewing for you like you've never seen. The waves have started. You might not feel it yet, but the waves have started. They're starting to kick up against the side of the boat. And before you know it, you're going to be in deep trouble, so deep that you won't know what hit you. And if God needs to send his waves and his breakers to roll over you, he will do it. He will do whatever he needs to get your attention. And this morning he's giving you a warning to stop before it goes that far and to call out to him now. You don't have to wait till you get into the depth of your trouble to cry out to the Lord for rescue. For some of you, the trouble's already started. You're up to your neck in quagmire. The moving sand is all around you. And before you got here this morning, you didn't quite know what to do. But Psalm 107 has some wisdom for you. Do you remember the refrain? What do you do? What do you do when you're besieged by trouble and you're up to your neck in it and you can't move and you know that the trouble's your fault and you wonder whether anybody can help you and whether anybody else even wants to help you? What do you do when you're in that kind of trouble? Even if it's your fault. What's the first refrain? You remember? Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and what happened? He delivered them from their distress. I don't care how much of your trouble you think is your fault. I don't care how much of the trouble you think isn't your fault. When you cry out to the Lord in your trouble, he delivers you from your distress. Now, there's a final bunch of you here this morning, and I think a lot of you are in this category. You feel like me. We've been there, done that. We've cried out to the Lord, and he's answered. We're among those described at the beginning of the psalm. We're among the redeemed of the Lord, whom he has delivered from trouble. And if you, like me, are in that group, what is it that you're called to do? After he's found us thirsty and hungry, wandering aimlessly in the desert, led us by a straight way to a city of plenty. After he found us imprisoned in the shadow of death and despair, and he burst our bonds apart and he broke us out of prison. After he found us in the depth of this pit of despair that we thought we would never get out of, and he healed us and he delivered us from our destruction. After he found us and he snatched us from these waves, these menacing, angry waves that were about to do us in, where we are at our wits' end and we were about to give up. After he's delivered us from all of that, what is it that we have yet to do in response? What are you supposed to do when the Lord has rescued you from all of that? Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wondrous works, to the children of men. Let us thank the Lord for his steadfast love and for his wondrous works to the children of man. Let's pray together. Lord, we are your redeemed. We are your redeemed whom you have redeemed from trouble. And this morning we have but this one prayer. Thank you for your steadfast love. Thank you for your steadfast love and for your wondrous works to the children of man. Thank you. Amen.